Okay, so Ephesians 4:29 is going to be the basis of our talk, and that says, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." And so the first principle is to grasp the power of our words. And one of the things, it's so easy to speak. I think sometimes that we don't actually realize how powerful our words are. And let me just give you a few scriptures that we have. Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Now look at what that's saying. The tongue, my tongue, your tongue, actually has the power of life in it and the power of death. How many relationships have been destroyed because of words? Words. On the other hand, how many relationships have been enhanced because of our words? And we can actually, as believers in Christ, we actually are able to speak life-giving words, the words of Jesus, the words of the gospel to others. Proverbs 12:18 says, "Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Again, my words can actually pierce like a sword, but or my tongue can actually bring healing. So my words, your words are more powerful than a surgeon's knife. So your words can give encouragement, they can give instruction, they can build a relationship, or they can harm a relationship. And so I think part of the one piece of wisdom is just to own, I need to realize how powerful these words are that come out of my mouth. And for this, if we want to tie it back to Ephesians 4:29, I would tie it back to the verse that it may give grace, talking about these words, that they may give grace to the hearer. So when we are able to gather again as a church, when we hear the gospel preached, when we are talking with one each other, we're actually able to give grace to those in our family. Our words are that powerful. And that's why Jesus tells us, as you know, that we'll give an account for our words. So, and I know that's preaching to the choir. You're taking time out of your night to be here, and thank you for that. But this is just something that we need to remind our children, and to remind others. Just today, I was on the phone with a gentleman, and he was just all torn up inside about some things that had been texted to him. And then as we talked further, he talked about how he had grown up in a home where the children were allowed to say, to their mom, "We hate you. You're the worst mom in the world." And then his comment, well, they would make up the next day and regret those things. And so we talked about just the power of words, and we need to realize that. A second principle I want to suggest for us is to discern communication wisdom. Now, what do I mean? What do I mean by that? As I was thinking about this webinar, it's actually very broad, because the question is, who am I communicating to? Am I communicating to a small child? Am I communicating to a teen? Am I communicating to my spouse? And you may have come into this wondering, well, which area are we going to focus on? And it really, a lot of this depends on whom we're talking to. And you can see that in Ephesians 4:29 when it says, "As fits the occasion." So it's talking about the words that come out of our mouth need to fit the occasion. Well, the military has a term that's called situational awareness. And what that means is that you're able to discern the situation you're in and take appropriate action. And I just think Christians, we need situational awareness as well. And so what I want to do now is just take a few minutes and very high level talk about how I think communication to young children differs from communication with teens. So I would suggest that we're, as a parent, so this is the material I've been working on right now parenting, parenting with confidence, which is parenting 101. Parenting is affection and authority. It's both. So we want to be affectionate and loving, and we want to be authoritative as well. And so what that means is that we're comfortable, and again, thinking about young children here, we're comfortable giving commands. We say what we mean, and we mean what we say. We're not a threatening, repeating parents where our words just don't mean anything. And of course, that also means that we listen to them. These children are in God's image before us, and we want to give them our full attention. One of the complaints now, actually from some of the older kids, is that their parents are always on the phone. So as the teen is trying to talk to a parent, it's the parent who's not attending to them fully, but they're checking their phone as well. Somewhat related to this, and this material, by the way, is coming out of the book, The Disciple-Making Parent, in the chapters 10 to 13 here. One of the things, though, as we train them, is that we also can train them. We need to realize that we need to train them to listen to us. So that we'll talk in a minute here about communication sins. And so we want to listen to our children well, but sometimes we also, they can be too verbose. And so over communication can be a sin. And so we want to train them, you need to listen to us. So this is an area God had to say, this is my son, listen to him. Well, why does God have to say that? It's because people don't listen to them. And let me just, let me go into the teen part, and then I'm going to go back with a chart that I think will bring it all together. If we're communicating with teens, then we want to communicate that affection and authority as well, but we want to become more skilled at asking questions. There's been a renewed emphasis. I appreciate this in parenting today on bringing the gospel to our children and thinking about helping them think about what's going on in their heart. And I totally concur with that. I think that's a great emphasis. The only problem is when we try and do that with our 3-year-old, because our 3-year-old doesn't have much going on in his heart. So you're like, well, what were you desiring to the 3-year-old? What were you desiring from your sister when you bopped her over the head? He or she doesn't know what's going on in his heart. And so it's very appropriate to have consequences for young children. On the other hand, as our children get into the teen years, we need to ask deeper questions. We don't know what's going on in their heart and mind, and so we need to become more skilled in that way. It's almost like we have to be two different parents. Let me illustrate this. I think this will help. This chart, which comes from the material I'm working on right now, Parenting with Confidence. It's the idea of how training and instruction change over time. As a parent, God has given us two tools: training, which is action, and instruction, which is word. So Paul says in Ephesians 6:4, fathers, don't exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So we have two tools: training and instruction. And so tonight, obviously, we're talking about words, we're talking about instruction. But one of the things is that I would suggest is that for young children, there should be lots of training, and over time, that lessens for teens. Doesn't go away completely, but it lessens. So for example, with a young child, you control his schedule, you control when she's going to get up, you control what she's going to study. The book she's going to read, all sorts of things, what we're having for dinner, etc. Over time, though, you're giving your teenager, or we called it adult in training, a lot more freedom. There's a lot less controls. There's still consequences if you get a ticket, a speeding ticket. There may be some consequences with the car. But if you don't bring a certain grades, there are going to be some consequences, but there's a lot more freedom. On the other hand, when it comes to words, the depth of our words with our children is not super deep, and then it should it should become deeper over time. So it's honestly, it's hard for me to see a mom of a 3-year-old, saying, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Well, he or she doesn't know why he did it. He does, I just wanted that toy and I bopped my sister on the head. But on the other hand, when my child is older, is a teenager, I need to grow gradually to be a counselor, to ask questions, because I don't know what's in their heart. And a lot of times they don't know what's in their heart. And so just those clarifying questions can be really helpful. So if you put those two together, what that means is, and this is why I've said, in some ways, it's almost like we need to be two types of parents, where we're structured when they're young, and our words are not super deep, and very young, and then of course that gradually increases over time, and we're asking better and better questions as they get older. So the point there is communication. We need to grow in communication wisdom there. We need to say, this is an area I need to grow in. And that brings us to the third principle, I think, that should guide our thinking on this. And that is to say that we actually want to grow in our communication ability. What I would suggest is that, as you know, when we become believers in Christ, God saves us by the atoning work of Christ. We're justified. We don't have to do anything to earn our salvation, but he starts the process of making us, transforming us from one degree of glory into another. He's transforming us into his image. Part of that, I want to suggest, includes our communication. Many of us are not great communicators. So either we overtalk, or we undertalk, or we don't ask questions, or we communicate in anger. The last webinar I did, which you can find on YouTube, was on talking, overcoming anger. Maybe we need to learn to ask better questions, or ask less. This week I saw a meme that said, people always tell introverts to be more talkative and to leave their comfort zones, and yet no one ever tells extroverts to be quiet and make the zone more comfortable. So what's the point? The point is that we can be over talkers, we can be under talkers, we can be angry talkers. There's all sorts of sins that come with our communication. So I would encourage you to ask yourself, how can I grow in communication? How can I communicate more like Christ? And then after you've asked yourself that, ask the Lord that in prayer. Ask your spouse. Ask your spouse, how can I grow in communication? And perhaps ask each other how we can grow in communication with our children. Study the Proverbs and see how much it talks about wise communication. Now, and again, that'll come out of Ephesians 4:29, such as is good for building up. So that's growing in ability, so that we'll know what is good for building up. Now, I want to emphasize one of my favorite saying. I don't know if it's one of my favorites, but it's a favorite. To be willing to do this, to be willing to say I can grow in certain areas, is to stop the excuse of saying, well, I'm just an extrovert or I'm just an introvert. And for that, it's realizing this saying that personality is not destiny. And so, yes, God has made us different personalities. Absolutely, he has. And the introvert will never become the extrovert, and vice versa. And that's okay. That's good. And yet we also need to not excuse our own sin in that, and just say, well, that's just the way God's made me. Well, no, personality is not destined in. And when we first got married, my wife would say that I was an introvert, I was intimidated people. And I didn't do that intentionally. But over time, as a pastor and with her encouragement, I've grown, I hope, in encouraging, in expressions, learning to speak pleasant words, learning to have hard conversations. All those things can be learned. And so we need to realize, we need to say, how can I grow in my communication ability? How can the Lord sanctify that so that I am a better communicator next year at this time than I was? So if I'm under talker, over talker, those move more towards the middle. If I'm not an encourager, I become deliberately encouraging, and people can recognize that. All sorts of ways. How can I grow in communication ability? My fourth suggestion is, which comes, you'll recognize it right out of the well-known book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's this: understand and then be understood. Understand and then be understood. And the idea is that that we need to understand first. So communication. Ted Tripp makes this point in Shepherding a Child's Heart. Many people think that communication is, how do I speak better? But it starts with listening better and really understanding. And again, for support here, we'll tie this into Ephesians 4:29. Only such is good for building up as fits the occasion. How can I know that unless I know what's going on in your heart? And since I can't see what's going on in your heart, I have to ask questions to know what's going on. Proverbs 20, verse 5, emphasizes this as well. It says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Now just look at that verse. And again, think back to the teen, that diagram with the teen. My spouse, my teen, his heart, her heart are deep waters. And if I'm going to be a man of understanding, I'm actually going to draw that person out. In the book, The Disciple Making Parent, and that's where this material is coming from, chapters 10 to 13. I have this diagram really related to this verse. And the idea that there's different levels of communication. And so there's cliche level. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. Good to see you. That's total cliche. Then there's information level. Deeper is information, such as, what do you do for work? And all as you're getting to know someone. How was your day? That's an information. We had this meeting, we had that meeting. That's information. Very appropriate. It should happen. But then over time, or as you'll see, as you'll get closer to the heart, as you start to talk about opinions, and you start to talk about feelings, and you start to talk about transparency. And all of that is going on in our heart. There are fears. There are things that are going on. There are deep in our heart. And when someone says, well, he built a wall or something. Well, this is just a different analogy. The point is, you're not getting down to that deepest level. And so again, to go back to Proverbs 20, verse 5, the purposes of a man's heart, the purpose of our teen's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding will draw them out. So that's, as we become better at asking questions, we can draw them out. Proverbs 18:13, this one's very, very convicting in this area here, about understanding before being understood. And that is, he who speaks before listening, it's to his folly and shame. And so again, we can speak, we can read somebody's mind when we actually can't, but we think we are. And so Proverbs 18:13 says that's to our folly and shame. On pages 108 and 109 of the Disciple Making Parent, I got a lot of some different questions. Jesus asked over 300 questions. he was a master at asking questions, and we need to grow and become a master as well. So to have even just some basic open-ended questions, here's some that I pulled right out of page 108, 109. What are some challenges you're facing these days? That's much better than saying, how's your day? Or here's one, what's the best thing that happened today? Or what's the worst thing? Those types of open-ended questions. Another great one, thinking now, especially of the teen years, or even perhaps even our kids in their 20s, our spouse, how can I pray for you? And that allows them to share as deeply or as shallowly, again, going back to our well, as they want, no matter, depending on where the relationship is. It gives you a chance. And then pray. That's not just a manipulative question to, it's a real question. How can I pray? And then pray. Other questions, if you're having a discussion, what has influenced you to think this way? Again, thinking about a teen, perhaps if there's some conflict. Have I understood you correctly? Do you think I've understood you? Those are great questions, because you're just repeating back what they're saying. This is what I heard you say. Have I understood you correctly? I want to make sure I understand. Just a couple things real quick related to this. All this takes time and space. It assumes time and space. And so, one of the things that we did, and I would encourage you, is we went out on donut dates, and so that's one thing that you can do, take with your kids. I did a donut date journal. So that's a resource there to connect. And my wife and I went on a coffee date, so we can talk about that. There's an article on my blog about that as well. And then last but not least here is that we need to take ownership of our words. And that really, this comes full circle back to this idea of the power of words. And that means that I'm self-aware enough to ask forgiveness when my words don't honor the Lord. So just this idea, no one can make me sin. Nothing my teen does, nothing my toddler does, nothing my spouse does can make me sin. The words actually reveal my heart. And so if I'm living before the Lord, it doesn't matter what my children do, it doesn't matter what my spouse does, I can respond with kind words. And when I don't, I can rightly confess that and take ownership of that, and ask forgiveness, because ultimately we're living before the Lord and not before our spouse, and asking forgiveness. And again, we don't have time tonight to go into that, but it's not asking forgiveness if you say, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but you shouldn't have been home late. Well, then the but erases everything that came before that. So so take ownership of our words. And that's really the passage that comes right here. It says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. And that, I just go back to that again and again for my own conviction of sin. There's no asterisk there. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth unless you have a really hard boss. Nope, that's not, that little asterisk is not in there. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth unless you have a smart aleck teen. Nope, that's not in there. So you can just put in your own little, you can check your Bible and see if there there's wiggle room in your Bible that says, well, if this situation happens to you, it's okay when you let corrupting talk come out of your mouth. So anyway, we're going to take ownership of our words. So let me just open it up for questions here. Just some of the resources I mentioned were the Disciple Making Parent and the donut date journal and parenting with confidence. So the donut date journal is questions to take kids out on donut dates. And the disciple making parent, of course, is a centerpiece of our ministry. The parenting with confidence is a resource I'm working on right now. That parenting with confidence is parenting 101. So it'll be our new video series. So I'm willing to hang around so that's what I have. So that's about 25 minutes there. And happy to hang around. So let's talk for maybe 20 more minutes. One questions. What type of father-son time do you recommend when your son is a young teenager? So to me, the donut date as a face-to-face works really well with girls, because you're talking, and my girls went through the moon, that they get to have time with dad, and we get to go out and get donuts. I think if you've begun early enough with guys, it also can work as well. So I still will go out occasionally with my sons. Obviously, that's changed now that we're in the middle of the virus and you can't go out. But I also think that there's a blessing with guys where you're going shoulder to shoulder and doing something, so that really the purpose is it's half to do what you're doing. It's half to go fishing, but it's the other half is just when there will be times that either you will take the initiative and say, hey, I've noticed this about you, and can we talk about that? Or vice versa. Hey, can you help me understand, what are the challenges you're facing going into ninth grade right now? What are you feeling? Or I just read a book on media, bullying. Do kids in your school do that? Do you ever experience that? And so those, especially with guys, I think having that shoulder to shoulder time and figuring out what sort of things you can do to actually have that shoulder to shoulder time. So to me, how can I plan to do that? Because in the busyness of life, often that gets squeezed out. So David, do you want to ask a follow-up question on that, specifically about having that time of communication? I think the idea is, to me, one of the things as we watch Jesus disciple is he, and I talk about this in the disciple making parent presentation. If you'll study his life, he taught the crowds and he made disciples. He healed the sick, he made disciples. He went to weddings, he made disciples. And so those things were going on at the same time. Those were integrated. And I know it's hard to keep that in our minds, but if I'm saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna start fishing, we're going to rebuild a car, we're going to play golf, we're going to do something, but besides teaching my son how to rebuild a car, I also want to have some planned questions in there that I'm just like, hey, what's going on? Yeah. And it's that time. I just heard a presentation by, or not a presentation, it was a personal conversation with the president of Southeastern Seminary, Danny Aiken, and he talked about that they just every Saturday in their home was football from like 11 till 8, and just he had 4 sons, and they just watched football. And and what was going on? Well, a lot more besides football was going on in that time. So that's just, when is that time? Good. Other questions like that on communication? So one question about, is there any place to get books besides Amazon? And the answer is, unfortunately, not right now, because of the way the publishing works. And I'm sorry about that. And yes, I know, love to have them someplace else, but unfortunately that's the only place. That's the only other place. Okay. Any other questions? I'm sure I'm sure I haven't solved communication problems there in so quickly. What are Before we go, then tell me, what are some challenges that you are facing? So here's one. I have a young teen who is set in his opinions and argues to defend them. He's not open to instruction from God's word. How can I understand and break through those barriers to reach his heart for Christ? That's a good question. Let me address that, Tony. So basically, you're saying, so the heart, and really this was understood, and I should have emphasized it more. Communication is at the deepest level heart to heart, but Malachi 4 talks about that we can turn our hearts away. So children can turn their hearts away, fathers can turn their hearts away. And so you're saying he's not open to instruction. So, and he's a young teen, and that's very important because of the age. I think I would pursue two strategies with the rebel son. One is love, kindness. Romans talks about it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance, and so he can know that he's sinning, but we want to be kind, basically. And that means not being drawn into arguing. That means showing him appropriate love that's not indulging. I think the other thing, and again, I'll just speak to this just a minute. I don't go into it more in the parenting with confidence, but in my mind, the age of 12, age of 12 is significant. It's the only time we see Jesus as a child, and he asserts new independence from his parents, and he doesn't apologize. And so to me, I think there's something that changes in our children, in our offspring, from 0 to 12 and 12 to 20. And so at that point, we need to treat them as more, they obviously assert their will more. We want them to in some ways. So in this case, though, he's asserting his will in a way that he doesn't want to. He's still under your roof. So to me, I'm going to try and shift my shepherding of him. I'm going to shift my shepherding with questions. So, and I'm just going to become see how I can become a better questioner. And I tell you, as a pastor, as a preacher, that's really hard. But questions like, son, you've seemed to change on this. Help me understand what's going on in your mind. So it really more than I can elaborate on here tonight, but asking questions, shepherding questions to seek to go on what's going on. So, like, for example, another question might be, just to introduce the conversation, is to say something like, son, I've noticed that you've shifted over time. Have I done something to offend you? What have mom and I done something to, one of the things that people say is that hypocrisy in the home turns kids off to Christ. Do you see that in mom or me? And so you're starting to draw him out, invite him through the questions. So love and questions all the time. You're the authority, but that authority is shifted. So that's just a quick summary, I think, of one way. Just that, can't tease that out much more, but here in the limited time. But that's just one way that I've got to shift my thinking. And I still want to shepherd. Still want to shepherd him. And it's so easy to see them as our little 5-year-old who should do what I say. He should. And yet we got to say, okay, no, he's 15, he's 14. His heart is deeper, to go back to that diagram. And I need to draw out, where did this come from? Has he considered this? Have you considered this? How would you like me to pray for you? You know, you're closing, you seem to be closing yourself off to communication with me and Mom. Okay, well, that's where we're at, but I still want to pray for you. Tell me some way I could pray for you. So all those are ways to communicate that kindness there. And that deserves a lot fuller treatment than we can give tonight. So let me close with one, and it kind of ties in. And I haven't wanted tonight to be an infomercial, and one note, by the way: Disciple Making Parent and Parenting with Patience are available at Grace and Truth books. Yeah, I forgot about that. So that is true. So you can support Grace and Truth books. I don't know if he has Parenting with Patience up on the website. So you can email him and say, hey, stock Parenting with Patience, but the Disciple Making Parent and the Donut Date Journal should also be there. I don't know if he covers those as well. So yeah. But one question that's been asked by 2 or 3 moms: how do I instruct my children first time obedience and confirm that they've heard and understood me? Well, so without it being an infomercial to those 3 who asked that question, you need to watch the email for Parenting with Confidence, because Parenting with Confidence is the parenting 101. And with young children, it's a combination of giving commands, expecting them to disobey, and then knowing what consequence I'm going to have when they disobey. So it's making sure, it's training myself. My wife has a great saying: parent training, child training is primarily parent training. And so it's training myself to make sure that I give a command they can hear. But I've also got a plan, because given the nature of children, they're going to disobey. And that's what God calls us to: bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So tonight we talked a little bit about instruction, but really the whole Parenting with Confidence course, which Lord willing is going to be out sometime this summer, is on that parenting 101, how to use training, and expecting to say, okay, I'm going to ask them to come, and they're not going to come, and how am I going to train them in that, and then what are going to be the consequences? So, well, I've enjoyed this, and we spent a lot of time together, and thank you so much for entrusting your time to me tonight. And if you have other questions, I'd love to hear them. And one other thing, because my speaking schedule is cut because I'm not traveling, I would love for perhaps for your church to consider doing a virtual conference. So we do the Parenting with Patience. We could Overcoming Anger. We could do that as a virtual conference. We could do the Disciple Making Parent as a virtual conference, or we could do the Parenting with Confidence, that Parenting 101 material. So please consider that as a church, and if you'd like to do that, just email me as well. So we're going to sign off tonight, and so thanks for coming out. Please email me. I love getting your emails, just knowing you're out there. When you get an email on Friday morning or Saturday morning, that's coming from a real person. So thanks for staying in touch.